on your notes, same thing that was on your notes on Friday. In order to simplify, you have to factor first. You have to factor first. You have to factor first. And then after you factor, then you cancel out all the factors. What's a factor? Well, let's start with a number that you know, hopefully. What are the factors of 15? 3 and 5 are factors of 15. Why are 3 and 5 factors of 15? Because you multiply them together. Factors are things that are multiplied together. You can only cancel factors. So these next examples are not on your paper. Please put them out in the margin or on the back so that I can make sure you understand these. You can cancel the x's. And the simplified answer would be 10. But right here, you cannot do that. You cannot cancel those x's. And let me explain why. I brought my Gorilla Glue from home to help you understand this. You know, you ever use Gorilla Glue? If you glue something together with Gorilla Glue, it's going to stay. Gorilla Glue is better than Elmer's glue. It's better than super glue. It is just a good glue. I fixed my chair that was falling apart with this Gorilla Glue, and it is fixed. It's going to stay together. I had some other Gorilla Glue that I also had a project in my bathroom. I was putting in a new sink, so I used the sink Gorilla Glue, and that sink is stuck there. It is not going to come off. And the reason I'm telling you about this Gorilla Glue is because up here on the board we have something even more powerful than Gorilla Glue. This glue right here is called adding glue. That adding glue is way stronger than super glue or Gorilla Glue or any other glue you can think of. And if you try to do this, cancel, you know what happens? Disaster. An explosion. Your whole math paper explodes and you die. Do you understand how serious this is? You cannot do that. You cannot cancel like this, or you will be responsible for crashing all of the whole mathematical system. Do you understand that this is serious? And that there's some glue over here that's just as strong. This is called subtraction glue. Do not try to cancel if there is subtraction glue or adding glue. You understand how important this is now. It's not just a little minor mistake. It's a major math mistake if you do that. Now, the reason is because of PEMDAS. The real mathematical reason is because of PEMDAS. This is addition and this is division in the different orders of operation. And what has to come first, addition or division? Division has to come first. And so before you could divide, you would have to add those together, and you can't because you don't know what x is. There's another thing I need to mention here. There's another very important math concept right here I hope you already know about. The denominator cannot be equal to 0. Do you know that? That the denominator of a fraction cannot be equal to 0. You cannot divide by 0. If you do either one of those things, our whole mathematical system falls apart. Again, do you want to be responsible for that? If our whole mathematical system falls apart, the lights go out, the electronics go out, our cars don't run, all of those are based on mathematical systems, and so we would go back to the Stone Age if you put a 0 in the denominator. So, that can't happen. So, in these examples, X cannot be equal to 0 because the denominator can never equal 0. You got that? All right, now we're ready for example number 1. And when you have a simplified problem, did it say solve? Are we solving for X? We can't solve for X because we don't have an equal sign, we don't have an equation. That's going to come up next week. But first we're going to simplify. To simplify, you have to factor first. You have to factor first what factors out of the numerator, 15 and 5. What's going to come out of those? And do you see that they both have an X? So, oh, wait. Before I do that, can I cancel like that to make it easier? Just exploded my problem. Can't happen. Just killed it. Totally lost it. Erased it. See how critical that is? It just went totally away. So, just killed the problem completely. Okay, so we can't cancel, so we have to factor first. And so when we divide that by 5, we get a 3. Divide that by X, we have 1 X left. And then what? 5 divided by 5 is 1. Now, this 5X right here, are there any adding signs right here? So this is a factor. So now I can go, that's the canceling sound. Sound effects on this. Okay, and so our final answer is 3x plus 1 divided by 2. That's what's left when everything's canceled. But we have to state the excluded values. Excluded values are from the denominator. The denominator cannot equal 0. And so if I divide that by 10, cancel, because there's no adding there. This is the excluded value. X cannot equal to 0 because if it did, then it would make the denominator equal to 0. Would you go back to your notes at the top of the page where you have these notes? Do you have a part 3? Okay, so underneath this one, can you squeeze one more note in there? 3. Denominator cannot equal 0. The denominator can never equal 0 on any fraction anywhere, but it's going to be especially important on these problems. So did you write that in on your notes up above? So when we get to a problem, we are going to factor first. Does anything factor out of the numerator? No. But the denominator is a trinomial, 1, 2, 3 parts. You multiply the first number times the last number, and you get a negative 15. Any of those add up to get me the 2 right here in the middle? You can see I came prepared with my factors already written down, and you'll have to write those factors out. Now, since this is a 1, I can use my shortcut factoring. And now it is factored. Let's go ahead, before we go on, let's go ahead and figure out the excluded values. We have excluded values because the denominator cannot equal to 0. And if I add 3 to both sides, the denominator cannot equal to 3. Also, this other factor, x plus 5, cannot equal to 0. Solve that. So here are my excluded values. That's what x cannot be equal to. Now, coming up after we have a few more skills, we'll be finding out what x is equal to. We know right now what it's not equal to. Now, doesn't it look like this part right there should cancel out? Can I cancel that part right there? Hold on. We're going to get there. You can't cancel it out unless it's the same numbers with the same sign. So if we just switched them around, would that be okay? And so if I just switched them around, did I recopy it correctly? Is that what it was? Except for the new, did I recopy the denominator correctly? X minus, yeah. So all I did was I switched the order. Does it cancel? But it looks closer. Do you see that this is the same thing with opposite signs? So as she mentioned, if I factor out a negative 1 out of the numerator, out of this part right here, factor out a negative 1, now, does that match? Now I can cancel it out. So that's a technique that we use a lot when we have the same numbers and variables, but the signs are backwards. You factor out a negative 1. And so that is my final simplified answer. Okay, I have a trinomial on top and a trinomial on bottom. So I've got to factor both of those. So 1 times negative 6 is negative 6. So I write down the factors of negative 6. These factors would add up to equal 1. The numerator factors into x minus 2, x plus 3. The denominator, 1 times 24 is 24. Do any of these add up to 11? Any of these factors? And so this is 3 and 8. And so this factors into x plus 3, x plus 8. Now before I go on, I'm going to go ahead and do the excluded values. If I solve that for 0, it's just going to change the sign on the 3. If I solve that for 0, it's going to change the sign on the 8. If this is simple factoring, those are the two excluded values and when you change the signs. So these are my excluded values. Now what's going to cancel? And so the final answer is okay, so you see I have come prepared. I've already got my factor charts. First number times the last number is negative 42. Any of these add up to give me a positive 1. Since this is 1, I can use the shortcut factoring. Multiply the first number times the last number, and you get negative 24. Will any of those add up to get me a negative 1? Any of those pairs of numbers add up to get negative 1? What does that mean? It means that this does not factor. It means that this does not cancel. To find it does have some excluded values. To find the excluded values, you would have to do the quadratic formula on the denominator. We're not going to spend class time on that because that's really not the focus of our lesson today. It does have some excluded values. Those excluded values would be fractions, and you could find those by the quadratic formula. But it doesn't cancel anything. Uh-oh. Do you see that we're getting more complicated here? When this number is not 1, you multiply the first number times the last number, and you get a negative 4. Which one of those pairs is going to add up to give me 3 in the middle? Now you can see I have my board divided in the numerator and denominator because I cannot use my shortcut factoring. Because this number is 2, I have to use the long factoring. Because this number is 2, in place of this 3x, I have to put these factors that I found. Do you remember how to factor by grouping? This makes a factor and that makes a factor. The GCF here is x. The GCF here is 2. I factor an x out of here. X cancels that one out. I factor a positive 2 out of here. 4 divided by 2 is 2x. 2 divided by 2 is 1. Look at that. Do you see a common factor? The 2x minus 1 is a common factor. The x plus 2 is the second factor. Hopefully, you remember doing that previously. And so next, that's all that worked. That was just the numerator. Now I have to work on the denominator. 2 times 3 is positive 6, but since this is a negative 7 right here, I have to have double negatives here. Which pair is going to add to a negative 7? In place of this, I'm going to still have the 2x squared. But in place of the negative 7, I'm going to put these two terms in place of the negative 7 so I can factor by grouping. So, where are you talking about? Okay. So, this factors out an x, this factors out a negative 3. Factor an x out of this, you get 2x minus 1. Factor out a negative 3 out of this, you get 2x minus 1. Look at that, 2x minus 1 is repeated. Okay, all that work to factor it, now I have to put it back together as a fraction. 2x squared minus 1x plus 2. That's what I had on the numerator side, correct? 2x and x minus 3. And the denominator cannot equal to 0. And this part of the denominator cannot equal to 0. I'm going to solve that one out because it's a little bit more complicated. Add 1 to both sides. Divide by 2. This is the excluded values. And what's my answer? When you get your homework paper in a minute, it will have an answer blank. Please put your final answer in the answer blank because you can see there's lots of work and I might have difficulty finding your answer if you don't put it in the answer blank. The numerator here is a binomial. What factors out of 2x plus 6? I'm going to factor out a 2, and that's going to be x plus 3. That's how the numerator is going to factor. The denominator is a little bit more complicated. I have to multiply the 3 times the negative 6 to get negative 18. Which one of those will add up to get a 7? And so I have to replace the 7 with a negative 2x and a positive 9x so I can factor by grouping. The only thing that factors out of that is an x. That will factor out a positive 3. If I factor an x out of this, if I factor a 3 out of this, look at that. There's a repeated factor. This would be 3x minus 2x plus 3. That's just my denominator. Let's see. The denominator is 3x minus 2x plus 3. What was the numerator? Was that the correct numerator? Before we go on, we're going to do excluded values. The excluded values are because the denominator cannot equal to 0. The denominator cannot equal to 0. If I solve this and add 2 to both sides, and divide by 3, the denominator cannot equal to this fraction 2/3 or negative 3. Those are the excluded values. Cancel, cancel. Simplified answer. Ooh, that looks ugly. what will factor out of the numerator? Oh, wait. Let's make it better. Can I just cancel my 6's like that and cancel my 18's like that? Make it easier? Can I do that? Explodes. Not allowed. You can only cancel factors. So what factors out of the numerator? Not just 6, but 6x. Take a 6 and an x out of that, I have an x left. 18 divided by 6 is 3. What factors out the denominator? And so if I divide a 6x squared out of that, and 6 out of that, and 18 divided by 6 is 3. And then this part factors some more. Go right ahead and do that. So I like to write the excluded answers like this, but on Schoology they're written in set notation. It means the same thing. The numbers in the set are the excluded values. Now, when I wrote mine, I wrote the x squared like this so that I can cancel the 6's. I can cancel one of the x's. Did that cause an explosion? Are there any adding signs in this part right here or that part right there? So they can cancel like that. And so this cancels out, and so what I have left in the denominator is that right there. Everything canceled out in the numerator. So what is the numerator now? When you are canceling, you are actually dividing. 6 goes into 6 one time. X goes into X one time. This goes into that one time. And so this is the final simplified answer. This paper will be due on Thursday, but I want you to do at least 1 through 6 before you walk in the door tomorrow. I'd like you to do it all if you possibly have time. But before you walk in the door tomorrow, I need you to have 1 through 6 completed. And I think I said the wrong day because I'm confused about what day it is. And then the whole paper will be due on Friday.